I've been driving trucks for the better part of 20 years. Long hauls, short runs, you name it. I've seen just about everything you can imagine out on those empty highways. The kind of things most people only read about in books or catch glimpses of on the news. But there's one night I can't forget, no matter how hard I try. It was one of those nights, moonless, dark as pitch. I was hauling a load of steel across Interstate 80, somewhere in the middle of Nebraska. The plains stretched out for miles, nothing but flat land and a few lonely gas stations every 100 miles or so. It was late, close to midnight, and the highway was practically deserted. Just me and the hum of the engine, the hiss of the tires on the wet pavement. The drizzle had been steady for hours, and the windshield wipers were keeping time like a metronome. I'd been driving for hours, and the road had become a blur. That's the danger of long-haul trucking. Sometimes the monotony gets to you. I always stay sharp, but something about that night felt off. You know how they say you can sense things before they happen? Well, that night, I felt like something was waiting out there for me. At first I thought it was nothing, just one of those weird moments where your brain plays tricks on you in the dark. But then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, something moving on the side of the road. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, leaned forward in my seat, trying to get a better look. At first I couldn't make out much. It was just a figure, tall and thin, standing off on the shoulder. That was strange enough. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of nowhere on a night like this? I slowed down a little. Not much, but enough to take a better look without pulling over. My high beams caught the figure for just a second, and my blood turned to ice. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. Tall and gaunt, with a posture that made my skin crawl. He wasn't standing right on the ground, though. It was as if he was floating, just a few inches off the pavement, and he was waving, not like someone trying to flag down a ride. No, it was slow, deliberate, almost like he was beckoning me. Everything in me screamed to keep driving, but my foot came off the gas, my truck slowing to a near crawl. The figure was clearer now, still just on the edge of my headlights, but blurry, like the rain was distorting him, or maybe my eyes were just tired. But there was something wrong with the way he moved, something unnatural. He didn't step toward me. He didn't need to. My truck inched closer, and for a split second I could have sworn I saw his face. Pale, hollow eyes staring right at me. But what hit me hardest was that smile. Thin, stretched too wide, like his face didn't know how to hold it right. That's when my gut kicked in, fight or flight, and I wasn't about to stick around to see what this thing wanted. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator. The truck's engine roared to life, and I shot forward, speeding past him. For a split second, I was sure I saw him reach out, that skeletal hand almost grazing the side of my rig. I didn't look back. I drove fast, faster than I should have, the speedometer inching higher as I put distance between me and whatever the hell that thing was. My heart was pounding, hands slick with sweat. I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see him right behind me, maybe floating above the asphalt, chasing me down the highway. But there was nothing. Just the road, black and empty, stretching out behind me. Still, I didn't slow down, not until I saw the lights of a truck stop up ahead. It was one of those 24-hour joints, a beacon of warmth and safety. I pulled in, parked the rig, and practically jumped out of the cab. I needed to get inside, needed light, people, anything to make me feel grounded again. The diner was half full, the usual crowd of truckers and late-night travelers sipping coffee and chatting about nothing important. I took a seat at the counter, ordered a cup of coffee, and tried to steady my hands. But even in the bright fluorescent light, I couldn't shake the image of that figure, the way it had stood there, waiting, the way it had waved like it knew I'd stop. I sipped my coffee, staring out the window into the night. The rain had let up a bit, but the highway beyond the parking lot was still wet, the darkness thick and oppressive. My mind kept racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe it was just some drifter out there, messing with me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. You hear stories, you know. Weird things that happen out on the road. Ghosts, apparitions, things that can't be explained. Most of the time I don't pay them any mind. I'm a practical guy. I don't believe in that kind of stuff. Or at least, I didn't. Now, I don't know. I finished my coffee and headed back to the truck. I didn't want to get back on the road, not after that. But the load wasn't going to haul itself, and I couldn't afford to stay at that truck stop all night. So I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled out onto the highway. For the rest of the drive, I kept my eyes straight ahead. I didn't look at the shoulder, didn't glance at the mirrors, and I sure as hell didn't slow down for anything. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. Every time I'm out on the highway, especially in the dark, I can't help but wonder if I'll see him again, that tall, gaunt figure, waving, beckoning, and if I do, I don't think I'll be able to drive away a second time. The wind howled like a banshee that night, rattling the windows of my cab as I pulled into a deserted rest stop somewhere in the Mojave Desert. Long-haul trucking has always been my life, ever since I could barely see over the dashboard. You get used to the strange sights along the highway, the odd people, the empty towns, the abandoned gas stations. But this felt different. There was something in the air that night, a thickness that I could feel crawling on my skin. Maybe it was just the desert playing tricks on me, or maybe it was the endless miles of highway that had started to get to me. Either way, I needed to pull over, catch a few hours of sleep before continuing my haul. I found the rest stop, empty as a tomb. Not even a car parked under the flickering neon sign that hung limp in the wind. I parked my rig in the back, away from the lights, and killed the engine. That's when I saw him, a lone figure, sitting at one of the cracked, weathered picnic tables near the edge of the rest stop. He was hunched over, his face lost in the shadows cast by his hood. Something about him was off. My instincts screamed at me to leave him alone, but I couldn't shake the unease that crept up my spine. I climbed into the sleeper cab, trying to convince myself it was just another drifter, another soul wandering the lonely highways at night. But sleep didn't come easy. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the image of the figure over and over. Who was he? Why sit out there in the cold wind? The questions gnawed at me, the answers far too disturbing to contemplate. When I finally drifted off, it didn't last long. A loud banging on the side of my truck jerked me awake, my heart slamming against my chest. I shot upright, hands trembling as I fumbled for the light. I could still hear the wind howling outside, but the banging had stopped. I looked out the window. The man was gone. The rest stop, from what I could see in the dim light of my truck, was empty. No cars, no people, just the cracked asphalt stretching out in every direction. I tried to calm myself, convincing myself that it had been a dream. But the sound was real. The banging on the metal was real. I knew it deep in my gut. Grabbing my flashlight, I climbed out of the cab, boots hitting the ground with a soft crunch. The wind cut through me, cold and biting. The beam of my light swept across the rest stop, searching for any sign of movement, any sign of the man I had seen earlier. Nothing. I swallowed the rising fear in my throat, trying to shake the creeping dread that settled over me. It was just my imagination, I told myself. The desert played tricks on people. I'd heard plenty of stories from other truckers, hallucinations, mirages, weird shadows on the horizon. But I knew this was different. This was something else. I climbed back into the cab, locking the doors behind me. The silence inside was suffocating, only broken by the occasional creak of the truck's suspension as the wind pushed against it. I lay back down, forcing my eyes shut, praying for sleep to take me away from whatever nightmare this was. But I wasn't alone. I felt it before I saw it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, a prickle running down my spine. Someone was watching me. I opened my eyes, slowly, scanning the dark interior of my cab. Empty. Just me, and the steady hum of my own breathing. Then, without warning, a scream. A scream so shrill, so blood-curdling, it felt like it had ripped the night apart. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound pierced the silence, echoing through the rest stop before fading into the howling wind. It had come from the direction of the restrooms, at the far end of the lot. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the truck, to turn the key in the ignition, and get the hell out of there. But I couldn't. I had to know. My legs moved on their own, my feet hitting the ground before my mind could stop them. Flashlight in hand, I started walking toward the restrooms, the beam of light barely cutting through the thick darkness. The scream had sounded like a woman, but there was no one else here. At least, no one that I could see. As I neared the restroom, I hesitated, my mind racing with every possible horror waiting for me behind that door. But there was no going back now. I pushed the door open with a creak, the smell of mildew and something else, something rotten, hitting me in the face. The flashlight's beam flickered over the cracked tiles, the broken mirrors, the rust-stained sinks. Empty. But then, at the far end of the room, something caught my eye. A shadow moved, quick, darting into the last stall. I swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight tighter, my palms slick with sweat. I took slow, deliberate steps toward the stall, each one feeling heavier than the last. The door was slightly ajar. I nudged it with the tip of my boot, pushing it open. Nothing. The stall was empty. I exhaled, relief washing over me, but only for a second. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the shadow hadn't disappeared. It had moved behind me. Before I could turn, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. Cold. Icy cold. I spun around, but there was no one there, just empty air and the sound of my own panicked breathing. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself in my rush to get out of that place. I ran back to my truck, heart pounding in my chest, and slammed the door shut. I didn't wait. I started the engine, tearing out of that rest stop as fast as the rig could take me. I didn't look back. Not once. To this day, I don't know who or what I encountered that night. I've driven that stretch of road 100 times since, but I've never pulled into that rest stop again. Something about that place was wrong. And now, every time I hear the wind howl, I feel it again. The icy grip of something unknown, something waiting out there in the desert, watching, biding its time, waiting for someone like me to stop. The rain fell in sheets, turning the world outside into a distorted watercolor of dark greens and grays. It was the kind of night where shadows seemed to stretch and twist into something sinister. I was driving my rig through the Appalachian Mountains, the road winding through dense forests, steep inclines, and hairpin turns. It was my first solo run, and the thrill of freedom mingled with the heavy weight of responsibility on my shoulders. As I navigated a particularly sharp turn, I spotted a figure huddled by the side of the road, a young woman, drenched and shivering, with a worn backpack slumped beside her. Her thumb was outstretched, a silent plea for help. Despite the warnings echoing in my mind about the dangers of picking up hitchhikers, I felt a pang of sympathy. I pulled over, reasoning that I could at least take her to the next town. She climbed into the cab, her face pale and drawn, and I caught a glimpse of her wide eyes, glistening with unspoken fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely above the sound of the rain pounding against the metal roof. "I'm Sarah." Trying to break the ice, I asked where she was headed. Her answers were vague, her gaze darting nervously around the cab. Something in her demeanor unsettled me, but I brushed it off as a natural reaction to being stranded in such a storm. Yet, as we drove deeper into the night, the unease burrowed into my gut like a rat gnawing at a forgotten scrap. The rain intensified, and so did Sarah's behavior. She began to mumble to herself, her words disjointed, slipping in and out of coherence. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and I could see her glancing back, her face pale with dread. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to maintain my composure. "Are you okay?" I asked, attempting to keep my voice steady. "Do you hear them?" she responded, her voice low, barely a whisper. "They're coming for me. They can't find me here. Not with you." My heart pounded as I stole another glance at her. "Who's coming for you, Sarah?" But her gaze was fixed on the window, as if she could see something lurking just beyond the rain-soaked glass. The man with dark eyes and a sinister smile. He's everywhere, watching, waiting. A chill slithered down my spine. I tried to assure her she was safe with me, but my words fell flat. Her body began to tremble, and she started rocking back and forth, her fingers fidgeting against her legs. I kept my eyes on the road, desperate to reach the next town, but every second felt like an eternity. As we drove, Sarah's ramblings spiraled into frantic declarations. "He knows where I am. He'll find me. He always finds me." I could feel panic rising within me. I pushed the accelerator down, the engine roaring to life, as if the truck could outrun the darkness surrounding us. The road stretched ahead, a never-ending black ribbon of uncertainty. "Sarah, take a deep breath," I urged, trying to calm both her and myself. "Just breathe." But she didn't respond. Her voice rose, filling the cab with a cacophony of terror. "He's here! He's right behind us!" In that moment, I glanced at her. Her eyes were wild, pupils dilated as if she were trapped in some waking nightmare. She began clawing at her arms, nails digging deep, leaving angry welts on her pale skin. The sight of her self-inflicted pain jolted me. "Stop it!" I shouted, trying to grab her wrists, but she was too far gone, convulsing now in a fit of fear. Her screams pierced through the roar of the storm, chilling me to my core. Suddenly, she let out a blood-curdling scream, her eyes rolling back in her head, and I felt the truck swerve. The road blurred past as I fought to regain control. My heart raced. "Hold on!" I shouted. But it was as if she couldn't hear me. With one last desperate act, I pulled over onto the shoulder, tires skidding against the gravel. I threw the truck into park, my breath coming in short gasps. The rain lashed against the windows, creating a curtain of chaos outside. I turned to her, fear pooling in my gut as I reached out. "Sarah, listen to me. You're safe. You need to focus." But she didn't respond. Instead, she turned to the window, eyes wide with terror. "He's coming for you too," she shrieked. And that was when I felt it, a presence, something heavy and dark pressing against the air around us. I dared a glance into the rearview mirror, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a shadow pass by, a figure lurking just beyond the reach of the headlights. I felt my pulse quicken, a primal instinct urging me to flee. "Get out of the truck," I yelled, panic rising like bile in my throat. But as I reached for the door, the headlights illuminated the figure. A man stood there, drenched in the rain, his dark eyes glinting like shards of obsidian. A sinister smile stretched across his face, a smile that seemed to beckon me into the void. "No!" I roared, slamming the door shut. "John, you have to drive," Sarah cried, her voice a desperate plea. "He's here." In that instant, I knew. Whatever darkness had taken hold of her was now turning its gaze toward me. I felt trapped, the weight of the unknown pressing in from all sides. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get away from her and the man outside. But I couldn't leave her. With trembling hands, I turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtering to life. "Hang on," I shouted, my foot slamming down on the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, tires kicking up gravel as we tore away from the roadside. I glanced in the mirror, but the man had vanished, swallowed by the night. Sarah's screams echoed in my ears, mingling with the howling wind. I drove on, deeper into the darkness, the storm raging around us. But the memory of that night would forever haunt me. A night of a hitchhiker, with a dark secret. A night when I realized that some roads lead not to safety, but to the very heart of terror itself. As the rain poured down, I understood then that I wasn't just a trucker. I was now part of a nightmare, a dark secret that would never let me go.